I'm here with my friend, Dr. Richard Scott, GP, but not quite.
Thank you, Andy. Yes, well, technically the word I think is emeritus. So I retired on Tuesday. Here we are on Thursday evening doing this recording. So yes, I'm no longer a practicing medical professional, but you can call me doctor, you can call me Richard. I don't really mind.
I guess, like me, you answer to quite a few things as long as they're polite.
Indeed.
The rudeness usually gets completely ignored. Right. Now, we talk about all sorts of topical things in the news. However, we've actually got some questions that have come in. The first one, I'll be honest, it came from me from a live link in a different show where I said this: does being thankful actually improve our mental health?
And the answer is yes. Lots of studies have been done. In fact, when I wrote my book in 2013, God, I've Got Cancer, I looked at how Christians do better from all areas of medical health studied, mental, physical. We even live longer, cancer being my particular interest at that stage. But one of the things that's really important is gratitude, thankfulness, having not just a positive attitude, it goes beyond the merits. But a positive attitude does improve our health, there's no doubt. But actually having a thankfulness to God, having faith, which reflects in thankfulness to God and gratitude, is very good for us mentally, physically, and in terms of how long we live. So yes, it is good for us.
Fine. Another one, not quite from me. So on a Friday, Peter and I do new studies. We love finding a new study, and quite frequently I will make fun of it because it's the sort of thing that says, new study discovers that if you fall onto the floor from a great height, it'll hurt. It's that sort of thing that I especially like, because somebody somewhere has got money to ask a really stupid question. And occasionally fascinating ones come out like this one. Can onion juice really help with hair loss? Which is a study we talked about last week.
Well, I'd have to read this. I'd have to read the study. Very hard to imagine how. But the thing about science is, people do extraordinary studies, and sometimes they hit the bullet. They hit the the bullseye, from a most extraordinary angle. So, don't know the answer to that one. Have to look it up.
I'll get the study to you by email.
Get the study to me and I'll look it up. That'd be helpful.
So Peter and I chatted, and I just thought, I can't conceive. One, why did someone get onion? How do you even get onion juice in any sort of sensible quantity? Two, why did they pour it over somebody's head? Did that person know? And three, what
probably happened? It probably isn't a topical thing. It's eating it, I would imagine. And then maybe it's something within an onion which stimulates hair growth, I'm guessing. But yeah, send me the articles. I'd love to read.
I was, let's just say I was sufficiently skeptical about the long-term positive benefits of that particular study.
Indeed, because if it's not helping you, just don't do it.
No, keep onions in the food. Right, now another one that came in from Nathan. I recently heard that drinking a hot drink on a hot day can cool you down. Do you think this could be true? It was suggested that the heat of the drink can help balance your internal temperature, therefore making you feel cooler.
He's right, but for the wrong reasons. So it doesn't balance our internal temperature. Our internal temperature remains at 37 degrees C, 98.4 Fahrenheit. But no, when I worked in India, particularly, people drink an awful lot of hot tea in a hot climate, and it's because it makes you sweat, and sweating cools us down. So that's the logic behind it. Is the sweating? It's nothing to do with balancing your internal temperature. It's a sweating thing. Now, that said, personally, I would prefer to drink a cold drink on a hot day. Although after I remember in my hockey days, I'd play hockey. First thing I wanted actually was several cups of tea, of hot tea. It just seemed to go well. But sweating is what cools you down on a hot day.
Yes, I'm not a big fan of the whole sweating thing. Never, ever have been. I sweat not profusely, but I've always been quite easy to sweat. And I don't like extra reasons why I'm now got a head that's wet. It does not make me happy.
Here's use a different technique to cool down.
Yes. Air conditioning, a very long walk around an air-conditioned supermarket, or cold drinks.
Yes, indeed.
Cool. Okay, no pun intended. Right, have you got a topic for us for this evening?
It's an unusual one. Actually, it's humility.
Ooh.
And so my wife always smiles when I talk about this, and I say, yes, I know you don't think I'm very humble, but actually you have to realize that the most humble man ever was Moses, and humility is to do with your relationship to God. But I take your point. Anyway, something came my way which I thought I'd pass on to the listeners. Now, people who've listened to me before will know that I'm into sport. So I read the sports section avidly in the paper. But the best articles aren't just describing a game, whether it's football or tennis at Wimbledon, shot by shot. That's not very interesting. It's the wider aspects. The psychology, what makes people tick, who's had a bad start in life, who's overcome it, or who was doing well at their game, then not so well, and then overcame it. It's the wider stuff that's much, much more interesting and usually requires the reporter to do more work. And there was a good example last month. So recently, England played footy against Senegal, and we lost 3-1. You may or may not remember that, Andy. I didn't watch the game, but we lost 3-1. The exciting thing there was this was the first African nation ever to beat England at football. Senegal 3-1 the other day. And there's no doubt that, having watched a very brief clip, we did not play well and Senegal deserved to win. But that wasn't the most interesting thing. It centred around Bellingham, Jude Bellingham, probably, arguably, our most talented player. And the coach was writing about him in the paper afterwards, viewing him as vital to the team with a fire that mustn't be dimmed. You can see where this is going. His behaviour was terrible on the pitch, but we don't want to rein him in too much because, all the benefits he brings. But the funny thing was the coach, who's Thomas Tuchel, who's a German, his mum, so Thomas Tuchel's mum, was watching the game, watched Bellingham behave badly and gave him all sorts of stuff, a stick, and described him publicly as repulsive. Now, that's a strong word. And so that's a German coach's mum describing possibly our best player as repulsive. But, it's not the first time he's been criticised in the press for his behaviour. He's been sent off previously for swearing at a referee. That was recently. Anyhow, this was Bellingham. Obviously, he's very proud in his own performance, proud in the team's performance, doesn't want things to stand in his way and can behave badly when they do. And the author of the article basically said, look, he needs to grow up fast. He's only about 21, 22. Otherwise, it's going to be bad for all concerned. So that was Bellingham. And you might think, well, why am I bringing that onto Andy B's radio programme tonight? Well, it's because this article went on to something of far more interest as a comparison. Now, this was, if you like, Jude Bellingham as a modern black footballer for England. And there was another black footballer picked for England in 1925. And his name was Jack Lesley. And Jack Lesley used to play for Plymouth Argyle, who I guess must have been a better team then than they are now. They're fairly low down these days. But something extraordinary took place. The selectors picked him, they selected him, and almost immediately deselected him. Then the team sailed for Ireland to play the Irish, and Jack Lesley wasn't on the boat. Why was he removed from the squad? Well, a book's been written about it, and it's called The Lion Who Never Roared. And the facts are now well established. He was selected, obviously, because he was a very good player. And he was deselected when the selectors realised, because they hadn't seen him play in person, that he was black. So 1925, no further explanation. He was deselected and forever denied the right of representing his country because he was black. And as the story became better known more recently, Plymouth fans raised £100,000 and have built a statue of Lesley outside the Plymouth Argyle ground. And in 2023, in March, rather wonderfully, he's been posthumously, because he's died some years ago, awarded an England cap nearly 100 years after this injustice took place. So this is much more interesting than the Bellingham story. But putting the two together really got me thinking and got the chap who wrote the article thinking. The reaction of Jack Lesley was very, very interesting. Now, unlike Bellingham, he would never play for England. But his granddaughter, this is Leslie's granddaughter, some years ago, reflected that the injustice, terrible injustice, never embittered him. He never allowed it to encroach on his life, and he was certainly never defined by it. Quite the opposite. In fact, he didn't run away from the footballing environment that had caused him such pain, but he spent the last 15 years of his working life cleaning the boots of the first team squad at West Ham, as well as sweeping the terraces at West Ham. Remember, this is an England international, effectively. And he saw the cleaning of boots, he described it as wonderful privilege and a pleasure, clearly by no means beneath him. And when the manager of West Ham at the time, Harry Redknapp, learnt of this, he said that England's great players for West Ham, Bobby Moore and Martin Peters, should have been shining Jack Lesley's boots. And it struck me when I read this article, what humility, what an attitude, and what a total delight to hear of his story. So humbling and, to be honest, quite different from the Bellingham business. And it got me thinking, in the Bible, God loves humility and hates the opposite, which is pride. Pride puffs us up and is actually terribly damaging to all concerned, because pride says, I deserve this. Jack Lesley could have said, I deserve my cap, but he didn't. Okay, that's life. And I take great privilege and pride in shining other players' boots. Pride says, my talent, my riches, my relationships, everything is about me. Humility says everything is a gift from God, and then gives him all the glory. And it reminded me of a couple of biblical examples. We'll remember Naaman in the Old Testament, a self-important, high-ranking officer who got leprosy. And he was advised, wasn't he, by his servant to see the prophet Elijah. And he was highly offended when he was told merely to bathe in the Jordan 7 times, Elisha, rather, to bathe in the Jordan 7 times. Not what the great man expected, because the prophet never even went out to see him. Not what he felt he deserved. God had to humble him before healing him. Goliath never learnt humility, arrogantly taunted the Israelites for 40 days. Nobody had the courage to face him until a young shepherd boy, David, said, hang on, this is my God you're insulting, and took him on with a sling and a stone. And Goliath, literally, his pride came before a fall. And it got me thinking, how would I react, me as a Christian? Maybe, how would our listeners react if we were faced with a terrible evil, obstacle, if you like Goliath, or a terrible illness, like Naaman, or a terrible injustice, like Jack Lesley? Would we be humble enough to place all of our trust in God? Now, I don't know whether Lesley was a Christian, to be fair, but I do know that he was humble. There's no doubt about that. And the Bible tells us in the New Testament that non-believing husbands can be turned around by the actions of their believing wives. So our reactions, and this is, if you like, the mini preach at the end, our reactions will really impress those around us. We will all face challenges in life. And they may be terrible injustices. They may be massive obstacles like Goliath. They may be awful sicknesses like Naaman. But the answer given by Moses when he was faced with seemingly insurmountable odds, in the face of the mighty nation of Egypt and the Pharaoh, but who was described ultimately as the most humble man ever in Scripture, was to put your trust wholly in God. Yeah, Moses can't take on Pharaoh as himself, but with God, everything changes, and the whole country's situation altered as a result. So I think just something to chat about this evening, Andy, is that the message to us is loud and clear. Let's put our trust in God, no matter what, and perhaps especially if our circumstances are really, really challenging. Let's boot out pride from our lives and all its ugly manifestations, which may be repulsive, according to Thomas Tuchel's mother. My wife did say to me when I talked to her about this, well, maybe Lesley should have fought against injustice. Well, maybe he should have done, although I guess as a black guy in 1925, that wasn't very easy. Maybe that's a bit easier nowadays. I don't know. Fair point. But the fact that he humbly accepted his fate, he was practically Christ-like in the way he approached things. You remember when Christ went to the cross? He took it on board, even though it was completely unfair because of the bigger picture. So I just want to say, a bit like Plymouth supporters, nearly 100 years later, well done, Jack Lesley. Over to you, Andy.
Wow, what a story. That's the thing about humility, isn't it? Because if you say I'm humble, immediately, well, no, you're not.
Right.
You don't get to say you're humble. You can only demonstrate your humility. And I almost feel like sometimes humility, it's like a hindsight thing. You can't really see it until you look back and think, oh, that was humility. Because you need to see other bits and pieces around whatever it was going on. So might be a really bad English way of looking at that one, but I think sometimes humility, it's what we see afterwards, not in the midst of it.
I think that's absolutely right, and for others to say. But yeah, I mean, it was just an extraordinary example. I thought, I can't leave that one in the paper. I've got to bring that to the radio. And it's, of course, it's always challenging. It's challenging to Andy. It's challenging to me. Hopefully challenging to our listeners. Are we humble? Do we, that which means actually not just being meek and letting someone walk over us, although that's to be an extent what's happened to Lesley, but humility is actually putting ourselves in the right relationship with to God, who is our master, our Lord, our Savior, our King, and out of that should be the right relationship to other people. So yeah, are we humble?
I was having a chat with somebody else earlier, and we were talking about what it is that we do, who it is that we are, and the motivation behind it. And then one of the things this chap said, which was just brilliant in this conversation now, he said, I really think that God cares far less about what we're doing as opposed to how we're doing it or why we're doing it. And I
and
just
who we
think
are. Yeah.
I think that sums up a lot of what we're talking about, because this chap, he should have been playing for England and he couldn't. So what did he do? Didn't get embittered, which is that right there. That is phenomenal. And beyond that, he goes and cleans the boots of other players later on, which most of us, I would think, would see was beneath us. And yet here's a guy that was better than these guys because he went to international level.
Yes, isn't that like Christ washing the feet on Maundy Thursday of his disciples? You know, the great man washes their feet. What a lesson to us.
But that's where my brain was kind of going a little bit, because that is the perfect a similar thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So yeah, and I'll confess, I'm very glad the guy wrote, but I'd never heard about it. You know, I'm not a Plymouth Argyle supporter. I'd never heard of Jack Lesley. Well, I have now. Well done, Jack.
But I mean, I like the fact they've actually marked it with a statue. Good, well done, Plymouth Argyle. I like the fact that Harry Redknapp actually recognised that sufficiently to say, do you know what? It should be the other way around. And I think that's one of those things, isn't it? Where we get so focused on value in life. I had this conversation with Trevor Stammers, our friend Trevor, a long time ago, and he said the problem is people saw him as a doctor and therefore of greater value to other people, rather than, well, that's his function, that's his day job, and you know what, we're actually all equal in God's image.
Absolutely. And I think what you were saying earlier about, you know, we often define ourselves by our jobs, and actually God is much less interested in our jobs and what we achieve than our character. And it's about our character. And yes, out of our character should come good deeds. Absolutely. The Bible makes that absolutely clear. Out of our faith should come good deeds. But what God really wants is to having the right relationship with him and growing more like Jesus, as a result of which good stuff will happen. But we mustn't just do the good stuff. Otherwise, we're social actioneers. And to be honest, you don't have to be a Christian to do good stuff for poor people, let's say. No. I think it can help, but you don't have to be. What really matters to God is faith.
Let's just touch there a little bit then, because we think about social action. It's interesting. One of the bits of the Bible is pure religion. Now we think of religion as a bad thing. It's all evil and terrible and horrible, and it's all this and that, and you can't move. But then actually, the scripture says, but pure religion is caring for people who effectively can't care for themselves.
The orphans. James makes it clear. Yeah, the Bible is very challenging. Actually, you know, the more we read the Bible, the more we understand the mind of God. And, you know, okay, we're a long way away from any, you know, fully understanding it, but it is pretty clear it's in there. That's why we need to read it. And then when we do so, and, you know, God says, doesn't he, in his word, that we should hide his word in our hearts. There it is in the heart, so that we know how to respond. And I would hope that I would respond like Jack Lesley, although I think these days probably I would challenge it. But I need to do so from a humble attitude, always from a humble attitude, not from a prideful, this is what I deserve, even if, quite frankly, he did deserve it. He's teaching us something there. Whether or not he's a Christian, I do not know.
No, but he's there's an older version of the Bible that says, by your fruit will you be known. And I know you've already done this, but I'm going to have to do it again. If you look at what's been said of one of our current England players and a former England player, even if it was far too short, there is such a difference between the two of them of humility. But you look at them, the fruit is there. You look at what this guy's done over his life. He's made a life for himself. He's respected and massively revered for what he did. Yes, perhaps he could have and should have done stuff, those woulda, coulda, shoulda things, which, yeah, it's a difficult one. But actually, look at the guy today. That fruit, that's not good. That is actually ugly fruit, isn't it? I mean, that German mum, that's, I'm not going to say the word repulsive, but
I don't want to. I hope that Bellingham has learnt from that. He'll be enraged reading the article, but actually, it's been said for a reason. So I really hope he learns from it, because he is a wonderful player. You know, playing for England at 18. You know, the guy's marvellous, but he needs. You know, there's something to learn there. So I hope he does.
I suppose that's another thing, though, isn't it? We've seen that with our current culture, where we all want things fast. Amazon same-day delivery. If you're close enough to an Amazon big distribution center, you can get your thing within an hour, which is phenomenal, and that's really good. However, it means this sort of self-gratification thing, well, we want it now. We want to have that now. And I've read some stuff recently about how you've got this sort of disparity between people who bought houses 40 years ago when they could afford them, and complaining about people today, well, just work harder, but the wages have not matched the houses. So that's, you know, it's a redundant, you know, conversation in a sense.
It is. It's so hard for people nowadays. Yeah, there's no doubt.
It's crazy. And I think that's where humility really comes in, because what that guy's done, when you talk about it, there's like there's gentleness around his entire life and good. And that's the fruit.
Yeah. And he was, I mean, that bit in the also in the New Testament where Paul tells us, that I am content in all circumstances, in hardship, in pain, in persecution, all beatings and all the whole things in prison. My goodness me, really? But that's because he was so solid in his relationship to God. And clearly this guy, Jack Lesley, was content to shine boots as he was no doubt content putting the ball in the net as a player. Wow. Well, what's up? I mean, yeah, he's living it out. I just wish I knew whether he was a Christian. I'll have to look him up more.
It's a fascinating one, though, because he got on with his life. I am very confident if I was in that position and booted off because of something like that, I would not, I know this, if I'm honest, I would not have responded like he did in a gracious and humble way. I would not. I know I wouldn't.
Well, and I guess that's why I'm bringing it to us today to say, well, guys, that's true for most of us. So that's why we need to listen to this chap. It's clearly possible to do so. It's a bit like people who forgive murderers for killing their children. I mean, unbelievably hard. And yet we see Christians do it. And you think, wow, you are such an example to us. And that's why 100 years later, in fact, it is 100 years, 1925. So here we are in 2025, 100 years later, we're remembering Jack Lesley because he's teaching us something. So there we are. Let's learn from him.
Which then brings me to a question. Do we focus on the injustice of what happened to him, which is terrible? Or do we allow ourselves to focus on the good of his life and what he did instead? And I think most of us would go, as your wife did, well, that's terrible. That's where my brain goes. Immediately, I'm with your wife of that's wrong. But actually, we're missing out on the good and the beauty of what he actually did with his life.
And the good news is we don't have to focus on the injustice of being black and not playing for England because, half the England team, thank goodness, is black. So that's fine. That particular evil has been dealt with. So, but yes, if there is an evil that is still ongoing, and we know racism still exists and other evils, we should fight against them. So I think whilst it's great for his example of humility, there are also times to say, actually, a bit like Wilberforce did with slavery, no, I'm going to fight and fight and fight and fight until this is abolished because it's terrible. So, well done for people who are humble, and also well done, I say well done to those who fight against injustice.
Which it's really, really important to do. But I guess my little addendum to that would be, yes, let's fight against injustice if that's what God's calling us to do. And it's
if that's what he's calling us to do.
Which is important. But let's not lose sight of the sacrifices and the lives of the people.
And well done, the fact that he's done so well out of it and was obviously clearly a content man. His granddaughters, reflecting that, and you think, wow, marvellous.
What an absolute star and an example to every single one of us on this planet. We need to be more like him.
Jack Lesley.
Richard, thank you. If you've got any questions for Richard, you can send them to us. Email hello@pure247radio.org, hello@pure247radio.org. And of course, you can watch or listen on this later when it goes on our YouTube and podcast channel. Richard, my friend, that was brilliant. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It was unexpected, but I never know what's going to come up because it depends on what comes my way.
Yeah. I mean, wow, Jack Lesley, what a man. What awesome.
Absolutely awesome.
Here at Pure 24/7 Radio, we have had the privilege of speaking to some amazing people with amazing stories.
Now, what about, I thought I'd go a bit further, what about goat and sheep's milk?
Yeah.
Becoming quite popular. Very similar to cow's milk. So we don't use it in the first year of life, you can afterwards. And their nutrient profiles, how good they are, is pretty similar to cow's milk. Allergenicity, how often do they cause allergies? About the same. They're a bit more expensive sometimes. It's pretty equivalent.
Yeah, we're really excited, especially excited for Josh because it's his first book and he's really passionate with that Gen. Do you say Gen Z or Gen Z? I've heard it said
I don't know. I'm too old. I don't know.
Yeah, we're not in that age category, so we've not got a clue what they're called.
It's a pot boiler. It's a good, exciting popcorn thriller. I didn't think it was anything too special, but I think watching it at home, people will probably enjoy it more than I did going to the cinema to see it. Really good film.
I love it. I walk into a cinema and I turn my phone off. Nobody can get hold of me for a couple of hours. I'm in a completely other world. But every single time I go to the cinema, and for me it's like going to Oz. It's like going to another world and escaping and relaxing, and I thoroughly enjoy it.
If you have missed any of these interviews or would like to hear them again, you can. Simply head over to our catch-up section at www.pure247radio.org. That's www.pure247radio.org.